February 1st, 1988, Durham, North Carolina, 6:08 in the morning. The 911 call came in just as the sun was starting to rise over this quiet southern city. A woman's voice, shaking and tearful, reporting that her husband had been shot. The dispatcher, hearing the panic in her voice, immediately sent out units. Police officers and paramedics raced through the quiet residential streets of Durham, expecting to find a home invasion, a burglary gone wrong, maybe a domestic dispute that had escalated, something that made sense for a pre-dawn shooting in a peaceful neighborhood. What they found instead would eventually expose one of the most calculated cases of ending life in North Carolina's history. And the woman making that 911 call? She was about to become the prime suspect. Russ Stager, a 40-year-old high school teacher and beloved baseball coach at Durham High School, lay in his bed with a bullet wound to the back of his head. Blood soaked the sheets and pillows, spreading across the mattress in dark crimson pools. He was still breathing, but barely. His breaths were shallow, labored. The bullet had done catastrophic damage. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, working frantically to stabilize him. But he would pass away 3 hours later without ever regaining consciousness. He never got to tell anyone what had actually happened in that bedroom. His wife, Barbara Stager, stood in the bedroom wearing her nightgown, tears streaming down her face. She was 40 years old, a Sunday school teacher at their local church, a devoted mother of 2 teenage boys, a woman everyone in the community knew and respected. She volunteered at school functions. She helped with church events. She was the kind of person parents trusted with their children. Everyone who knew her would describe her the same way: kind, faithful, trustworthy, devout. And according to her, she'd just accidentally ended her husband's life. Barbara's story was straightforward, simple even. There had been some burglaries in their neighborhood recently, she explained to officers. Russ had started keeping a loaded .25 caliber pistol under his pillow at night for protection. He was worried about intruders, about someone breaking in while the family slept. That morning, their 14-year-old son Jason's alarm had gone off around 6 a.m. Barbara heard Jason get up to use the bathroom. She was worried, she said. Worried that Russ might wake up, hear footsteps, and think someone was breaking into the house. In his groggy, half-awake state, he might grab the gun and accidentally shoot their own son. So she reached under the pillow to remove the weapon. And somehow, the gun went off in her hand. The bullet entered the back of Russ's head, and her husband was gone. It was a tragic accident. A terrible, heartbreaking accident. The death was ruled accidental almost immediately. Case closed. But Detective Rick Buchanan, who arrived at the scene hours later, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. When Buchanan walked into the Stager home that morning, the first thing he noticed was Barbara's father. The man was methodically stripping the bed, removing the blood-soaked sheets, the pillows, the bedding. Everything that contained evidence was being pulled off and prepared for washing. Since the death had been ruled accidental by the first responders on scene, there was no crime scene preservation, no evidence markers, no forensic team processing the room. The evidence, potentially crucial evidence, was literally being washed away in real time. Buchanan wanted to stop him, but legally, he couldn't. There was no crime scene, just a terrible accident. Or at least, that's what everyone believed at that moment. During his interview with Barbara, Buchanan studied her carefully. He'd been an investigator long enough to know what genuine grief looked like. He'd seen countless people who'd just lost loved ones to accidents, violence, sudden illness. He knew the stages, the reactions, the ways trauma manifests physically. The hysteria, the devastation, the shock that makes people pace or shake or become completely catatonic. Real grief is messy and uncontrolled. But Barbara wasn't displaying any of that. She was crying, yes, but there was something detached about her demeanor, something almost rehearsed. Her answers came too quickly, too smoothly. She maintained eye contact. She didn't break down into the kind of sobbing you'd expect from someone who'd just accidentally ended their spouse's life. She was composed in a way that felt wrong for the situation. Her story was too neat, too convenient. Every detail had an explanation. Every question had an answer ready. But instinct isn't evidence. And without proof, without something concrete he could point to and say, "This doesn't fit," Buchanan could only watch as Barbara Stager prepared to bury her second husband and collect another insurance payout. Wait, her second husband? That detail would become the key that unlocked everything. Here's where this story gets really disturbing. Barbara Stager had been married before. Her first husband's name was Larry Ford, and he'd passed away 10 years earlier, in March 1978. They'd been married for several years, had 2 sons together. By all accounts, Larry had been a good man, a hard worker, devoted to his family. And here's how Larry Ford went. He'd been found gone in his bed, a bullet wound through his chest. Barbara told authorities that Larry had been cleaning his .25 caliber pistol when it accidentally misfired. According to her story, the weapon had discharged while he was lying in bed, sending a bullet through his body. It was a tragic accident, she'd said tearfully. He'd been handling the gun, and it had just gone off. Randolph County authorities had ruled it an accident. No investigation, no questions, no second-guessing Barbara's story. Just another tragic firearms mishap, the kind of thing that happens when people aren't careful with weapons. They closed the case and moved on. Larry's family wasn't convinced. They'd protested. They'd insisted the death should be investigated as something more sinister. But their concerns were dismissed. Barbara collected Larry's life insurance, a substantial payout, and moved on with her life. So let's do the math here, because this is important. Barbara's first husband, gone in his bed from an accidental shooting with a .25 caliber pistol, with Barbara as the only witness. Barbara's second husband, gone in his bed from an accidental shooting with a .25 caliber pistol, with Barbara as the only witness. Think about that for a second. What are the actual odds of that happening twice to the same person? What are the chances that 2 different husbands would both accidentally shoot themselves in bed with the same type of weapon, with their wife as the only person present both times? Statistically, it's virtually impossible. Lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place, at least not genuine lightning. But bullets from .25 caliber pistols apparently did in Barbara Stager's bedrooms. But nobody had connected these dots yet. The deaths had occurred in different counties, 10 years apart. There was no central database that would flag this kind of pattern. Barbara had moved on from Larry's passing, collected his insurance, and remarried less than a year later to Russell Stager, a divorced high school coach with a good job, and importantly, good life insurance. She'd become Mrs. Russell Stager, wife of a respected teacher, mother to 2 boys, active in her church, seemingly living a normal, peaceful life in Durham. She taught Sunday school. She attended PTA meetings. She was the kind of person who brought casseroles to neighbors and volunteered at school functions. The community mourned Russ Stager deeply. Students cried openly in the hallways. Fellow teachers shared stories about what a great mentor he'd been, how he'd inspired struggling students, how he'd given extra time to help kids who needed it. Parents talked about how he'd not just coached their children in baseball, but had taught them about character and perseverance. Durham High School's baseball program had lost its heart, and Barbara played the grieving widow perfectly. She attended the funeral in black, accepted condolences with tearful grace, spoke about how much she'd loved Russ and how devastated she was by this terrible accident. But someone wasn't buying it. Someone who knew things that the police didn't know yet. Jo Lynn Snow was Russ Stager's first wife. They'd divorced, but they'd remained close friends. Russ had confided in her about his life with Barbara, and what he'd told her was alarming. The marriage was troubled. Barbara was spending money they didn't have, racking up debt that Russ couldn't understand. There were affairs. Barbara was cheating on him. And there were other things, strange things that had made Russ increasingly paranoid and fearful. Most chilling of all, Russ had told Jo Lynn something that must have haunted her after his passing. He'd said, "If anything ever happens to me, please look into it." He'd suspected Barbara was planning to end his life. He'd even started connecting the dots about her first husband's demise. But by the time Russ figured out the danger he was in, it was too late. Jo Lynn Snow wrote a letter to the police, a detailed letter explaining everything Russ had told her, expressing her suspicions, demanding that they investigate Barbara more thoroughly. That letter would crack this case wide open. When Detective Buchanan started digging into Barbara Stager's background, the pattern became impossible to ignore. 2 husbands, both gone in their beds from .25 caliber gunshot wounds. Both deaths ruled accidental, both occurring with Barbara as the sole witness. Both followed by Barbara collecting substantial life insurance payouts. After Larry Ford's demise, Barbara had inherited his entire estate despite his family's vigorous protests. They'd insisted the death should be investigated, but their concerns had been dismissed. Now Barbara stood to collect $170,000 from Russ Stager's life insurance policy. And when forensic document examiners looked at that policy, they discovered something disturbing. Russ's signature had been forged. He'd never actually signed for that policy. Barbara had. The grieving widow was starting to look a lot more like a calculating predator who viewed her husbands as nothing more than insurance policies waiting to be cashed in. Forensic experts began dismantling Barbara's story piece by piece, and what they found was damning. First, the gun itself. Barbara claimed it had a hair trigger, that it had gone off with barely any pressure. But testing showed that the .25 caliber pistol required 4 pounds of deliberate force to fire. You couldn't accidentally discharge this weapon by barely touching it. You had to actually pull the trigger with intention. Second, the bullet's trajectory. Barbara said she'd been lying in bed next to Russ, reaching under his pillow to grab the gun when it fired. But the bullet had traveled on a downward angle, entering the back of Russ's head and traveling down through his skull. The trajectory was completely inconsistent with someone lying beside him, pulling a gun from under a pillow. The shot had been fired from above the bed, from someone standing over him. Third, the spent shell casing. It had been found near Russ's head on the bed. But when a semi-automatic pistol fires, the casing ejects backward and to the right with considerable force. There's no way the casing would have ended up where it was found, given Barbara's version of events. Someone had placed it there. Fourth, and most damning of all, the bloody sheets that Barbara's father had tried to wash away. Advanced forensic testing on those sheets revealed no gunpowder residue. None. If the gun had been fired at close range, as Barbara claimed, there would have been powder burns, residue, physical evidence of the discharge. The absence of any residue proved the gun had been fired from a distance, not while Barbara was supposedly struggling with it under the pillow. The science was telling a completely different story than the one Barbara had told. Investigators asked Barbara to do something that seemed simple on the surface: recreate the shooting on videotape. They wanted her to show them exactly what happened that morning, step by step. Barbara agreed, and in doing so, she unknowingly handed them the evidence they needed to destroy her story. As the video rolled, Barbara demonstrated her version of events. She showed how she'd reached under the pillow, how the gun had fired, how everything had unfolded. But as she worked through the recreation, something became obvious. Her demonstration was completely inconsistent with the physical evidence. The angle was wrong. The position was wrong. The mechanics of what she was describing didn't match the forensics at all. And as she realized this herself, you can see her on the video starting to change her story mid-demonstration. She repositioned herself. She altered details. She tried to make her account fit the evidence, but it was too late. The inconsistencies were now on permanent record. Then came the most extraordinary piece of evidence in this entire case. A student at Durham High School was cleaning out the gym lockers, just doing routine maintenance, clearing out forgotten items, when he found something unusual: a cassette tape. On the label, in handwriting everyone recognized, was Coach Russ Stager's name. The student turned the tape over to school administrators, who listened to it and immediately contacted police. What was on that tape would give Russ Stager a voice from beyond the grave. The recording had been made just 3 days before his ending. 3 days. On that tape, Russ's voice was clear, calm, and absolutely chilling. He described what had been happening in his marriage. He talked about Barbara attempting to drug him with pills disguised as aspirin. He detailed her suspicious financial activities: money disappearing, checks forged, accounts drained. He spoke about his growing certainty that Barbara was planning to end his life. Most haunting of all, he questioned whether Barbara's first husband had truly gone accidentally. The dots Russ had connected in life would become the evidence that convicted Barbara in death. The dead man had solved his own case. As investigators dug deeper into Barbara's finances, a clear motive emerged. Despite their modest teaching salaries, Russ made around $31,000 a year. Barbara made even less. Barbara had been living extravagantly. Designer clothes, expensive purchases, spending money like she was wealthy when she absolutely wasn't. She'd accumulated crushing debt that Russ knew nothing about. Credit cards maxed out. Loans in both their names. She'd been systematically looting their joint accounts, forging Russ's signature on checks and loan applications. She'd even forged documents claiming she had a book deal with a publisher, using this fictional contract to secure more loans. The woman who appeared to be a devoted wife and mother was actually a financial predator, drowning in debt of her own making, with her husband's life insurance policy as her only way out. Prosecutors reconstructed what actually occurred that February morning, and the truth was cold-blooded and calculated. For weeks before the shooting, Barbara had been trying to poison Russ with pills disguised as aspirin, but Russ had grown suspicious. That's what he'd documented on the cassette tape, and he'd stopped taking them. So Barbara switched strategies. She decided on a more direct approach. In the early morning hours of February 1st, while Russ slept, Barbara retrieved the .25 caliber pistol, not from under his pillow where she claimed it was kept, but from the dresser drawer where it was actually stored. She stood over her sleeping husband, aimed the weapon at the back of his head, and pulled the trigger. The downward trajectory of the bullet proved she'd been standing. The lack of powder residue proved she'd fired from a distance, not point blank. The force required to pull the trigger proved this was no accident. After shooting Russ, Barbara staged the scene. She placed the spent shell casing near his head, trying to make it look like the shooting had occurred differently than it actually had. Then she waited for her son Jason to finish his shower before discovering what had happened and calling 911. It was premeditated. It was calculated. It was ending someone's life for money. The courtroom was packed when Barbara Steger went on trial in Lee County. The case had to be moved from Durham because of intense media coverage. Prosecutors methodically presented their evidence, piece by devastating piece. Expert witnesses explained the impossibility of Barbara's story. Forensic specialists detailed how the physical evidence contradicted every aspect of her account. Financial experts documented her web of debt and forgery. And then, in a moment that left the courtroom in stunned silence, they played Russ Steger's tape recording. His voice filled the room, calm, clear, prophetic. He was testifying from beyond the grave, telling the jury exactly what Barbara had been planning, what he'd suspected, what he'd feared. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom as Russ Steger's words served as his own eulogy and the prosecution's most powerful evidence. Barbara's defense attorneys argued accident, coincidence, misfortune. They portrayed her as a loving wife and devoted mother who'd suffered two terrible tragedies. But their explanations crumbled under the weight of forensic evidence. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty of first-degree murder. Barbara Steger showed no emotion when the verdict was read. The same cold detachment that had troubled Detective Buchanan was still there. No tears, no outburst, no protestations of innocence. She was initially sentenced to death. But in 1993, during a resentencing hearing due to procedural errors, her sentence was reduced to life in prison with eligibility for parole after serving 20 years. Barbara Steger, now 76 years old, remains behind bars at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women in Raleigh. She's been there since 1989. In 2009, after serving 20 years, Barbara became eligible for parole. Russell Steger's family made the difficult trip from Tennessee to Raleigh to speak before the North Carolina Post-Release Supervision and Parole Commission. His sister, Cindy Steger Thomas, told the panel, 20 years of rehab still doesn't equal the fact that he wasn't given a chance after she ended him. The occurrence she committed completely destroyed my parents and my life. Russell's mother, Doris Steger, who was in her 80s by then, said simply, "It's very hard on me. I live with it all the time. You can never get around it." Detective Ricky Buchanan, who'd worked the case from the beginning, also appeared before the commission. He told them, "She is a dangerous person. She is cold-blooded, and she ends lives without remorse. She's the pillar of the community during the day. But behind closed doors at night, she's another woman. She's evil." Barbara's parole was denied in 2009. In 2018, she became eligible for parole again. Once more, investigators and Russell's family appeared to oppose her release. Once more, her parole was denied. Here's something that will probably disturb you. Despite being in prison for ending someone's life, Barbara has been granted certain privileges. She's allowed to leave the prison complex for short periods of time, as long as she's accompanied by a court-approved sponsor. She can go to restaurants, go shopping, experience brief moments of freedom before returning to her cell. As of 2024, Barbara Steger is 76 years old and remains incarcerated. She'll be eligible for parole consideration again, though given the pattern of denials and the continued opposition from both law enforcement and the victim's family, it seems unlikely she'll ever be released. Jo Lynn Snow, Russell's first wife, has been vocal about her belief that Barbara is a serial ending life taker who would strike again if given the chance. In interviews over the years, she's maintained that Barbara got away with ending Larry Ford's life and thought she could do it again. The two boys Barbara raised, her sons from her marriage to Larry Ford, had to grow up knowing their mother ended their stepfather and very likely ended their biological father as well. Jason Stager, who was 14 at the time of Russell's ending, even testified during his mother's resentencing, and his testimony only contradicted her story further. He said he was in the shower when he heard a popping noise and thought it was just the toilet lid dropping. His timeline didn't match his mother's account at all. While Barbara serves her life sentence, one major question remains unanswered. What really happened to Larry Ford in 1978? Prosecutors are convinced Barbara ended his life too. The circumstances are too similar to ignore. Both men went in their beds from .25 caliber gunshot wounds. Both were ruled accidents. Both resulted in Barbara collecting insurance money. The pattern is undeniable, but there's a problem. The physical evidence from Larry Ford's demise is weak. Randolph County authorities didn't treat it as anything other than an accident at the time. So crucial evidence was never properly collected or preserved. Some investigators who've looked into the case believe Barbara may have had a relationship with a law enforcement officer in that jurisdiction, which could explain why the death wasn't thoroughly investigated. Without solid forensic evidence, prosecutors decided not to pursue charges for Larry Ford's ending. Barbara was already serving life in prison for Russell's ending. What would be the point? It would cost taxpayers money for a trial. It would put Larry's family through the trauma again. And the outcome wouldn't change Barbara's incarceration status. So officially, Larry Ford's passing remains classified as an accidental shooting. But everyone involved in Russell Stager's case knows the truth. Barbara Stager got away with ending someone's life once, and she almost got away with it twice. The Barbara Stager case is terrifying for one simple reason. She was so normal. She wasn't some obvious monster. She was a Sunday school teacher, a PTA mom, a church volunteer, the kind of person you'd trust to watch your kids or water your plants while you were on vacation. But behind that wholesome facade was a woman who viewed her husbands as financial assets. When she needed money, when the debt became overwhelming, when her spending spiraled out of control, she didn't cut back. She didn't get a second job. She didn't declare bankruptcy. She ended the people who'd trusted her most. Russ Stager spent the last months of his life afraid. He knew something was wrong. He suspected what his wife was capable of. He even recorded his fears on a cassette tape, creating evidence that would survive him. But he couldn't escape in time. Think about how terrifying that must have been for him. Lying in bed next to someone he'd promised to love and trust, knowing that person was planning his ending. Every meal could have been poisoned. Every night's sleep could have been his last. The person who should have been his safe place had become his greatest threat. The case became the subject of a 1994 book by Jerry Bledsoe called Before He Wakes, a true story of money, marriage, and ending life. It was later adapted into a television movie in 1998, starring Jaclyn Smith as Barbara. The case has been featured on multiple true crime shows, including Forensic Files, Broken Promises, Deadly Women, Fatal Vows, and City Confidential. But beyond the media coverage and the books and the TV movies, the real legacy of this case is what it taught investigators. It exposed how someone can literally get away with ending someone's life and then use that success to do it again. It showed how important it is to look at patterns, to connect dots across different jurisdictions, to take seriously when someone says they fear for their life. If authorities in Randolph County had properly investigated Larry Ford's demise in 1978, Russell Stager would probably still be alive. He'd be 76 years old now, maybe retired, definitely still coaching kids somewhere, teaching them about baseball and life. But because Barbara got away with it once, she believed she could do it again. And she almost did. Detective Buchanan's instincts that morning in February 1988 were correct. Something about Barbara's demeanor was wrong. Her story was too neat. Her grief seemed performed. But without evidence, instinct means nothing. It took forensic science to prove what Buchanan suspected. It took Jolynn Snow's persistence to keep the investigation alive. It took a cassette tape recording made by a terrified man who knew his time was running out. And it took the courage of prosecutors to say what seemed impossible at first. This Sunday school teacher, this devoted mother, this pillar of the community was actually a cold-blooded ending life-taker. Barbara Steger's story serves as a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always look evil. Monsters don't always have fangs. Sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one sleeping beside you, the one sitting next to you in church, the one everyone describes as such a nice person. And sometimes, lightning does strike twice in the same place. When that lightning is actually a .25 caliber bullet fired by the same hand. Today, Russ Steger's legacy lives on through the students he taught and the players he coached. His recording, made in desperation and fear, ensured that justice would be served even after his ending. Barbara Steger will likely spend the rest of her life in prison, denied parole repeatedly, a cautionary tale about greed, deception, and the lengths some people will go to for money. Two good men are gone because they trusted the wrong woman. Two families were destroyed by greed masquerading as love. The Black Widow of Durham was finally caught in her own web. But the cost of justice was measured in lives that could never be returned.